All right, I made a discovery thanks to some people talking about agency and how you can't be moral without agency. And It hit a nerve in a metaphorical sense and lit a fire in my mind and so on. Now I've been struggling with depersonalization and I hadn't acknowledged it. I've been like searching for all these answers and looking up all this information and stuff like that for years now on a sort of autopilot and so on. Um, Luckily, I'm 140 IQ, so I have a very strong autopilot. Um, so I can go into depth and stuff like that and abstract thinking and so on, but it was a sort of almost passive minded intellectual pursuit, not a reality to be acted based on. And that's the problem with depersonalization. And then it struck me agency ties so much together, it's ridiculous. Like there's an IQ element, there's a cognizance or mindfulness element, which basically means think about yourself as a decider, um, front brain, even if it hurts your head kind of way. Um, Not back brain. It ties together why socialism is inferior to capitalism and why the left typically is less morally good than the right. Um, it ties together why low IQ people are less morally good as well. Um, it ties together why leftists do not like Christianity, and that's not a blaming them thing, as I'll get into later. Um, because I understand the logic behind it, and I'm like, yeah, I've been sharing that logic and so on. It's hell to live without understanding Christianity if you're a believer in it, at least in this sense, in my direction, which I'll explain. I didn't get a choice to believe in God. It kind of just happened, and I was like in the leftist mode of thinking about God that way, and it was absolute hell. I'll start by saying I totally get why a Christian might not like Christianity, or leftists might not like Christianity, sorry, and why there's zealots and stuff like that. Actually, I'll start with that. So they say the glory of God is a human being fully alive, and God is most honored or glorified when we're most satisfied in Him. What does that mean? And then you say God's made in the image of man and so on, and that we're co creators and so on. But we're not really creating anything, as they say. The whole joke about making an apple pie from scratch and says God says you need to make the apple first. What we are is agents who can affect the world. Now, if you have a kid, I guess you're sub-creating in a way. You know. Um, it's sort of okay. I'm gonna start. I'm gonna explain the reason why God works and isn't just when you use your agency, you're evil every time, and the only like you don't have agency. I do everything I want, and you take the blame, which has been my very strong conviction, like subconsciously or theoretically, or just making me miserable because I didn't want to. Um, I didn't want to believe it, but the logic of God is all powerful. He always does what he wants, and if I do what I want because I use my free will, then I'm evil and going to hell. That is a that is a very tortured existence, and the leftist naturally rebels against the um, logic of it subconsciously or something unknowingly, instinctually maybe, because the word free will sort of indicates freedom from in the modern context. Autonomy means freedom from or freedom to. Now, if you're infinite, if you're everything that ever existed and more, everything that could ever exist and so on, and you love someone, then the reason you want them to be perfect is so that they can explore that forever, intensely, and widely. And that's why God is good. And he's not just like super mad all the time because we're not perfect. Because anger, actually, no, sorry. I'm not going to say anger is imperfection because, you know, God is described as being angry at times and so on. But, being too angry, wrathful, is being a slave to your passions. It's also true that being too cold and calculating can be a slave to your instincts in some level. Um, Proper willpower derives from both instinct and cognition. Maybe cold and calculating is cognition only. But if you combine instinct and cognition, then you've got a fully human will that is best informed. And that gets into autism, which is autism is the lack of tendency to believe in agency. And what that means is half of their environment, the people, is not understandable by them naturally. They have to put an effort to map half their environment. It's part of the reason why higher IQ, slightly autistic people don't make good people for deciding social things. Because again, it's not just the lack of understanding of other people in general in some sort of intellectual sense. It's a lack of habituated, proper sense of agency in themselves and others. There's something about agency and experiencing it and so on, and having a sense of it in yourself and others, that is wisdom, not intellect. That's why higher IQ people tend to fail when you combine it with the fact that autism seems to be a bit of a risky gamble of hit and miss intellect as a genetic strategy and so on. Apparently, 38% of autistic people are low IQ, below 70 or 85. I can't remember. I think it's below 85. Only 21% of people are between 85 and 115, and 40%, so there's a slight giftedness, are above 115 IQ. So autism is a very specialist hit and miss gamble, high stakes gamble on intellectual capacity. But the social capacity is missing a little bit due to what I mentioned. Now, a low IQ person in general won't have a chance to have the bare bones intellectual processing to map agency properly. The reason why unsocialized people, whether due to intellect or abuse and so on, are so aggressive is because they're relying on Pavlovian conditioning like an animal, and they think like animals and so on. And they understand Pavlovian conditioning. You do what me no like, me hate you, until you do what me like. Or something like that. Now the thing is, I think there's a certain fishhook theory where, typically speaking, there's a line that goes to the left a little bit, and that represents one certain thing. And the ones I've seen is leftism and so on. And the rightward line goes the same distance in the opposite direction, but then curves upwards on top of it a little bit above the first line, and then it heads back to the center. And that represents the right wing. Or maybe it's like half the distance of the leftward line or something, you know. But basically, there's sort of like a sense of somehow if you go far enough in one direction, you kind of end up back in the center, sort of thing in a sense, except elevated. Now, whether you believe in that in politics or not, if you explain things as regular IQ or slight improvements to IQ as a normal person going leftwards, or sorry, normal people with higher and higher IQ being leftwards, with autism being kind of like a going rightwards along the hook. It might be an explanation of how autistic you really are, right? Where you, depending on your autism level, you're not necessarily going in the same direction for societal functionality or understanding other people. Which is why someone with 150 IQ, Jordan Peterson, can figure this stuff out really quickly, or something like that. And even though I'm only like 10 to 15 IQ points lower than him, and he's a genius, it took me ages to figure this stuff out by screwing up mostly. Because I'm autistic probably. Like I'm certain I am. I remember saying I got these exact situations and symptoms in deep by the nines that represent autism. I learned later on, and I diagnosed my symptoms without ever knowing what autism is at a young age. Anyways, back to agency. Victim complexes, grievance politics, lower one's sense of agency as the victim. And then there's that whole using your agency makes you always guilty thing for the oppressor class in your mind. So woke is like demonic in the sense of it hurts everyone. Victim class, oppressor class, whatever you want to call it. It hurts everyone because it removes agency, ability to do good, basically, or get good. It propagandizes removing agency, which is the source of true moral good character. And by the way, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's the groundwork. It's the foundation of a good moral house in order. And this is why people in Christianity don't like Calvinism, because it overemphasizes the universe acting on you, or God doing what he wants with you, to the detriment of what you want to do. And it sort of doesn't really pay much attention to you doing what you want to do, and mercy and grace and so on, in a way that people might understand as forgiveness and leniency, and trusting that if you use your agency, you're going to be better taken care of, and your mistakes won't be so bad if you make mistakes and so on. So you're in a good direction through agency. And the reason why Calvinism has rebelled against and hated so much is because it sort of has a way of talking that undermines the sense of agency in the way it's formulated. And materialist determinism does the same thing, and predestination from God does the same thing, and so on. And totalitarianism and Marxist forces of history thing, in some sense, does the same thing too. Now, granted, our history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. But so it's kind of predictable. But there's a Heraclitus tension of the opposites here, where it's both and for agency and mechanics. The personal agency, morality, mechanics, and use is combined. But for now, I'm emphasizing agency because agency ties into using things and understanding mechanics, especially with people and animals, and for the various higher IQ people, typically it's lacking, and it also explains why vicious, savage criminals are such a problem, and low IQ is a bad thing. Morally, not just personal life outcomes for the person, but makes them a worse person too, if you're not careful about teaching cognizance or mindfulness. And there's going to be a lower limit or an upper limit for, I guess I'll say it's a lower limit for a human teaching a low IQ person how to behave properly without being a psycho in some sense or an animal. But it's much lower than people might think if you're wise or cognizant and mindful about what it takes. Now, no, that doesn't mean everyone. But it doesn't mean just the select few deserve liberty and so on, and political power and so on. It's the reason why someone, a founding father, said the American Constitution is only fit for a moral and godly people, because God is logos, or agency, incarnate. And Schizophrenia, which can correlate to belief in God heavily, is a problem because it is the experience of nonsensical stimuli or events that are affecting your senses in ways you don't understand and can't control, resulting in a sort of experience of a lack of agency. And totalitarianism is sort of an attempt to remove one's agency and so on. Now, when the right wing talks of the liberal total state, what they're saying is the liberals in their fullness strip people of agency through victim politics in the theoretical realm, and in the practical, habitual, conditioned behavior realm and experience through an iterative or repeated process of experimentation with reality through the welfare state or all the social programs and so on. And what that means is the push for social programs at the expense of keeping what you earn interferes on some level with agency, which is the source of human well-being on some level. Like, it's one of the primary sources of what makes a human well off compared to an animal. So I'm just trying to collect my thoughts because this is kind of like there's so many little things that it ties into that it's like, holy shit. Okay. Autistic people can think they need to learn a skill to become indispensable because they can't socialize. But one of the ways this translates, and this isn't directly correlated to the agency thing, but it's kind of like a one of those things that doesn't deserve its own video, but it's kind of related, and I was thinking along it at the same time as agency stuff a little bit, so I was like, okay, I'll throw it in. It's probably relevant somehow. The reason so many midwit or slightly gifted autistic people are shit libs is because they know they can get by okay if they don't encounter problem people. And they want harm reduction to be the highest good because they know they can function at least with themselves. And that ties into the dangerous half of the environment that is unpredictable, and so on, which is why they want the rules-based order, to avoid a lack of sense of agency. But if you get depersonalization or a lack of sense of self-agency, then that's a problem. And drug use, trauma, schizophrenia, and propaganda telling you you don't have agency all contributes to it. Failure in one's goals contributes to it. When it's too often, too much. Well, I mentioned trauma already. There was another aspect to this that I forgot just now, but it's really important too. Okay, habituated conditioning of a Pavlovian sort towards failure to achieve one's goals is the practice to the theory of lack of agency. Belief in one's agency makes one more successful on average, and then belief in others makes you even more successful in believing in their agency for the most part, or some sort of ranking or ordering of agency and so on. You might have to do it on purpose and think with your front brain, even if it hurts your head or something like that. Developing agency means more people will be more moral and more competent because they've practiced and learned skills in regards to all the little aspects and domains that agency as a word covers. In practice, desire, skill, and so on. A propaganda or theory against a sense of agency and conditions that sort of hurt you when you try to be an agent, have agency, destroy you. And this is what is meant by on the path to heaven or hell. That's why life and success is considered blessed by God, and failure and death is considered cursed by God. Because there's a relationship between the two of agency or lack of sense of agency, resulting in better morals and better capabilities to get goals done, and less capability to get goals done, and animalistic, instinct-driven antisocial behavior. One of the ways to describe the proper situation for how to start looking at agency is respecting the will of others and believing in your own. Now, that's a line stolen from Big Boss in Metal Gear Solid 4 at the end when he's dying. But that's what it comes down to. Then you can stop being a man, you can stop being an animal, snake in this case, and start being yourself, a man or a woman. Now, if you want a potentially leftist friendly vision of the natural order of things, you might say something like God is a super agent. He gets what he wants 100% of the time. But humans are sub-agents, and they get what they want, say 30 to 70% of the time or something, depending on all the stuff I mentioned and like so on. And then maybe animals are sub-agents because they're more instinct-driven than cognizant, which is the source of wisdom, cognizant or mindfulness. Sort of thinking about your agency and other people's agency and animals' agency and so on, which is more of a human superpower than an animal thing. And that's why we're the highest species on the planet, the apex predator, the height of evolution in a sense. Despite all our physical weaknesses and so on. And it explains why we have technology and can share it and so on. It's a very communal species thing. But anyways, back to the sub-agents thing. Animals being instinct-driven mostly or only makes them sub-agents. And plants and viruses or RNA strands are sub-agents. And then you get to like dirt and rocks and stuff like that. They're not really they're not agents. They don't have a mind. Or they don't have some sort of data-driven growth, let's say. Just remember, agency specifically means, in the context of God, you can go against God's will, you can go for God's will, you can be aligned with God or against God for any given thing. But the reason depersonalization and trauma and so on is bad is because it coincides with a loss of agency. And I'm going to tell you something. This explains a big reason why also so many people prefer drug addiction and homelessness or prison to psychiatric institutions, and why the Soviet Union psychiatry abused psychiatrically dissidents and so on, because it's control in a sense. And that loss of agency is also why rape is considered a murder of the mind. And why do we hate death? Because it represents some sort of loss of agency, even if you believe in the afterlife, in some sense. Or at least it is a very it severs connections to people in a sudden way. It is irreversible, which is the Pavlovian conditioning to a loss of agency and so on. And theft is like a very tiny version of loss of agency, because you put your life into getting something, your time existing, that's limited, and then someone just takes it away against your will. And finally, we get to rights and responsibilities. Without being a moral agent, rights don't matter, because you're still a slave to your instincts or passions. But if you do have a moral agent component, then that means you have a responsibility to act decently. An irrational agent is about getting things done that you want to do, knowing how to do it. Agency needs to be cultivated. And it's not a guarantee of being right every time, but it's a way of thinking how to think, as opposed to thinking what to think, so that you can improve and so on. It's a magical gift that is just built into our biology mostly, except the lowest IQ people. It's why socialism is inferior to capitalism. It's why high taxation is worse than low taxation and so on. It's why the right and the left disagree so hard when they ask nature versus nurture, What they forget to understand is nature acting on nurture in the sense of the person outwards, and the importance of understanding that power. And to get better at it. But the trick is, you have to trust yourself on some level. Maybe not fully, but more than you distrust yourself. Because if you can't trust yourself, what can you trust? And why can you trust God in a helpful way from yourself if you can't trust yourself at all? Even God can't make you a good person if you're literally, totally, 100% untrustworthy. So you have to trust yourself. And basically, the only times you'll go wrong, trusting yourself, trusting God, and or trusting yourself 90% of the way, let's say, and trusting God 90% of the way, and maybe a little bit of uncertainty about God, and a little uncertainty about yourself, but not too much. And putting in some effort to think how to think, and the idea of agency specifically in regards to your existence and other people's, then you'll do good. And there was once a man so terrifying that he died alone despite ruling an entire nation, because his guards secretly wanted him to die, and they totally got away with it, because they said he didn't want to be, he asked to be left alone for the night. And all the people that discovered him soon after he became near death, every single one of them said, or didn't say, sorry, because you couldn't tell the truth in that country without getting punished. You couldn't express yourself without getting hurt in a big way. They all thought and did exactly what would kill that man without taking responsibility or looking like they were taking responsibility to a naive person. Every single one of them. And the thing is, that man basically tried to kill off 50% of each of those groups of people and so on before, which is why they did it. And that man was Joseph Stalin. And his philosophy was, trust no one, not even yourself. And if you aren't an agent, if you don't have agency, then you can't trust yourself. And if you can't trust yourself, who can you? So that's how it all ties together. Joseph Stalin trusted no one, not even himself. He denied his own agency. and he murdered millions and died miserable and alone despite all the trappings of power. Yet God is infinite and always living, no matter what we do to him, and he is agency incarnate, the very existence of agency itself. Take your direction and let the cards fall where they may.